Welcome back from the break. 1 in 5 Australians is diagnosed with autism, and in order to celebrate diversity within the Australian filmmaking industry, WTV will soon be screening the full-length version of a beautiful film named Knock Knock, largely written and produced by those diagnosed with autism. Keep an eye out for the schedule so you can watch the whole thing.
Mum, I heard a noise last night coming from the spare room.
Oh, the locked room? I think it's jammed. I called the real estate agent today, see if she has a way in.
Okay, cool.
So this film was put together and executive produced by Autism West. Some of the key contributors and the writer, who is actually my daughter, have autism, and I know Zoe utilises her voice as a way of communication, and she really infuses that kind of unique perspective of the world into her stories. Her imagination is very broad and very extravagant. The other thing which is interesting is she didn't speak, she was about 5 years old, but she would actually read a novel a day. She actually grew up on film sets with me. We would honestly have no idea how much she absorbed. And then she got to a certain age and she started writing stories in her late teens, and those stories turned into scripts and they turned into ideas, and she actually had a really unique voice that she wanted to express herself, and she understood a lot more than we ever knew.
Mum?
I like to play with the idea that sometimes life might be a dream.
Could you tell me a little bit about autism?
It can be high functioning, it can be low functioning, and everywhere in between. And it's actually kind of incredible because I think it's 1 in 5 people have autism. Zoe had late language, she had difficulty in understanding what was going on. She has high auditory processing sensitivities, so she'll actually be in a room and she'll hear everything quite loud. Things move faster for her, she really has to slow things down.
So I have high-functioning autism, been diagnosed with that since 2005. So that's had a lot of impact on me, mostly from social skills. Whilst it not necessarily comes out and is obvious to a lot of people, it's something that does sort of quite often sort of play on my mind and think like, oh, maybe I'm interpreting things incorrectly or this and that. So it mostly affects me from a social point of view. Yeah, it was a very good experience. It's not my first short film that I've worked on, but it was a great experience to work with like-minded cast and crew and people on the spectrum as well. And so I approached it from a visual point of view, like a more darker lighting-wise and, sort of more horror, thriller type style, which is something that I personally have not really had much experience in, experimenting with some different styles.
I'm Sophie Hennigan and I played the lead actress.
Do you have autism? No.
It was my first professional film, but I've done 1 or 2 at school. The feeling of being on camera, I like it, and I've also done stage work, but I much prefer camera work.
Tell me a little bit about the process of set with the actors.
Autism West approached a company that I'm associated with called Was TV, the not-for-profit organisation that works with charities and other not-for-profit organisations to generate high-quality, low-cost film work. I think in the crew I was the only non-autistic person on set. My little brother is on the spectrum as well, so this is partially why I was so passionate about it. I'm just like, yep, no, I love this idea, and I think it's a shame that we aren't doing more of it. There are loads of people with loads of different voices, and we don't get to hear them. And there is a focus now, particularly in the funding bodies, where we are wanting to hear new stories from new voices.
It means they call it neuroatypical, so you experience the world differently, but really who's to say the rest of us don't experience the world differently and they experience it, so it's just their unique way of experiencing the world, and it actually can create a unique creativity, so there can be a way that they can, and I noticed with Zoe with her autism, will see the world in a certain way, take it in, and then it will change the way that she sort of sees things that I would see, and it's very creative and highly intuitive, and so it can be this incredible gift.
And so now that you've done it, do you think the idea of writing more scripts will be something that you'll want to do?
Well, right now I'm working on a script for another movie.
once the bug gets you, you don't ever want to stop, I don't think.
And in our last story for this week, Alex has a chat with several health professionals at the My Health, Your Health Forum in Mount Hawthorn about the worrying increase in bloodborne diseases and STIs amongst our immigrant and Indigenous communities.
How important is the My Health, Our Health Forum?
Look, I think it's a very important forum. It's bringing together the work that we've done in the last 3 years. But more importantly, there are some what I would call startling findings in terms of something that we actually did, but we didn't propose to do in our response to the tender 3 years ago. I'm talking about the testing initiative that we facilitated along with the Royal Perth Hospital and some GPs and Clinipath, which enabled many people who received our information sessions and who chose to be tested to have access to the testing in a very convenient venue and a time of their choice. And what we found was absolutely startling. The people who tested positive, if you look at the rates of people who tested positive, particularly in some class intervals, they're very disproportionately higher than the mainstream Australian population. The other population that we obviously are concerned about are the Indigenous people, and that's because of their over-incarceration rates, which accounts for a much higher rate of hepatitis. Now, the important stuff is this. Every single person who tested positive to hepatitis is either requiring active monitoring or treatment. So we cannot take this lightly. I've got about 130 staff. 127 of them are born overseas, and they speak 68 different languages. Now, so the cultural and linguistic, capacity that we have is next to, to anyone, in this country, and that's what makes, and makes it important that organizations like ours are involved in complementing the work that mainstream agencies do.
This is a really important forum, and I'm really pleased to be here. It's important because we know that migrant communities, particularly migrant communities from Southeast Asia, have one of the highest rates of hepatitis B and C in Australia. And we need to do more, and this is a really important forum for us to understand how we can do more.
So what can you tell us about the STIs and bloodborne pathogens in India?
Yeah, in India, as you know, we have about, currently estimated to have about 2.1 million people living with HIV, and about less than about 3% of our population, I would say, having all of these bloodborne pathogens. HIV less than 1%, hepatitis B less than 1%, and hepatitis C less than 1%. So that's the estimates that we have in India. Amongst the rates for these STIs, like syphilis, it's coming down. Donovanosis is coming down. Herpes simplex and chlamydia is still on the rise. And we feel that most of these sexually transmitted infections can result in certain health hazards for the mothers in the reproductive age group. And you would find that with syphilis, you can have transmission of syphilis to the child and resulting in congenital syphilis, which should be eliminated. We have about 10,000 cases reported each year. My role here today is to ensure that I project the activities that the government in India are doing, and so that we can have lessons learned from both sides and perhaps help us in achieving our goals. It's a common goal to eliminate all of this infection. Perhaps I will gain some ideas from what is happening here and take it back and incorporate it into my practice there.
For some bloodborne viruses, some indigenous populations are disproportionately affected, such as the very high prevalence of HTLV1 in some Australian Aboriginal communities. Of course, there are also certain cultural practices which could increase the risk of transmission of blood-borne viruses, such as the risks of HCV infection, with tattooing and other body-piercing practices wherever infection control measures are not implemented. There are risks that individuals or even communities which live in these settings, in high-burden HIV, hepatitis settings, could be stigmatized and discriminated against because of broader community perceptions that they actually pose a risk to the broader population by contributing to the spread of such viruses.
That's all we have time for this week. Thank you so much for joining us and watching. We'll be back next week with more Perth stories on Undercurrent. I'm Deanna Cooney, your host. Take care.